Hold on. Oh no, I messed everything up. Oh, that's better. How are y'all doing? Hope it's a good day for you. Hope you're doing well. If you're working, getting a lot of work done. If you're not working, getting a lot of not work done. That's always nice. I did that Saturday. First time in a while. Like all I did was like watch a bunch of movies. It was kind of nice. Even though I don't know. Most of the movies I watched was like, it's okay. But there was one I watched that I liked a lot, um, called The Bedroom Window. It was like a 80s suspense thriller movie starring Steven Guttenberg of all people, or Steve, I should say Steve Guttenberg. And it was hard for me to get into initially because, like, I don't know, Steve Guttenberg. I just like I hear that name and all I think about is the Police Academy movies, which are like super goofy. And like this is a pretty, I don't know, it's like a serious movie. I mean, it's kind of in the realm of like a Hitchcock thriller, you know. I enjoyed it. It was good. Would I recommend it to everybody? Probably not everybody. Would I recommend it to you? I don't know you. So yeah. Go watch it, I guess. I don't know. That's your decision. Depends on how you feel about 80s movies. I'm starting to warm up to them again. I did not like 80s movies at all when I was younger, when I was a kid. I thought they were all really super cheesy. Many of them are. But a lot of them are kind of like growing on me because there's a lot of interesting artistic risky things that they did in 80s movies that nowadays like nobody does, and I find that sort of sad. And I was like, what word am I looking for? I guess that's the word I'm looking for. Just sad. It's just blankly sad. I was listening to a conversation about this the other day where somebody was talking about, part of the issue for modern day movies is that because the budgets are so restricted, and because and financial investors are so risk adverse, that all they want is like the Marvel movies, the Star Wars movies, the franchise kind of stuff, the reboots, anything where like an executive producer can go in their head like, oh, of course that'll make money. How does Teen Wolf 3 not make money? How does a new Star Wars movie not make money? Well, it turns out I've talked about this in a previous stream, but like you can overdo the Marvel thing to the point that like nobody likes it, and everybody's burnt out on Marvel movies, and happens with Star Wars too. Anyhow, that interview that I was thinking about was actually, you can check it out on YouTube. There's a channel I follow pretty regularly, although I've taken a break from it for a bit like recently. This music guy named Rick Beato, he does some pretty good stuff, and like he did this interview with this guy named Ted Goya, and Ted Goya is like I don't know, like an analyst of some sort, and like a jazz critic and all this other stuff. Anyway, he has a lot of really interesting insights on the future of art, and I'm really glad I listened to that interview. It actually like gave me a little bit of hope for the future because I think recently I have not been feeling like amazingly hopeful recently. I've been feeling a little bit like dour. Not maybe not. Well, maybe dour. I don't know. Just like kind of frumpy, feeling like, oh, there's no hope, and things are just going to stay the way that they're staying for forever, and blah, 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 blah. You know, the usual sort of cavalcade of negative thinking that can beset any one of us at any given point in time. Sort of prevents a person from taking some risks in their life, you know? And I honestly, like, in any sort of creative endeavor, there should be a little bit of risk taking. At least a little bit. You should at least be willing to sort of go, you know, this fails, it fails, and it fails on my dime, and it fails on my efforts. But it's a risk worth taking, right? It's not the easiest thing to like come into contact with, right? Because so many people think about, you know, well, I want to make this thing work out for the long term, and I want to build a career, and et cetera, et cetera. And all that stuff is good, you know. It's good that there are artists who can build careers from their work. And I mean, look, going back to my usual thing, if I were king of the world, artists would be the only ones with careers. Oh, what an insane world that would be. We'd all starve to death. But anyway, the point is, like, you know, you find where you're able. Hey, John Drett, welcome to the chat. Hope you're doing well today. You know, you have to kind of figure out where you're willing to take risks in your life. Not just creatively, but like with anything, right? That's the same thing. That can be the same thing with love, right? You meet somebody in your life who you just love dearly. You're like, should I tell them? Should I ask them out? Blah, 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 etc., etc. It's a risk. Because what if it turns out they don't like you in that way? Or, like, what if it turns out, like, you know, I don't know, any number of things. They're already married, or, I don't know, you embarrass yourself, you humiliate yourself in front of the one that you deeply desire and love, right? It's a terrible calamity. It happens to us all at some point in time or another. But it is a risk. That's kind of my point, is like, it's a risk that you take when you're like, I'm going to do this for love. And then you have to ask yourself later on, was it worth it? Oh, yeah, and that's the other risk. Like, oh, you know, what if it does work out in the short term, but in the long term, it's actually a nightmare? That's the other risk nobody ever mentions. John Drett says, good, glad I could finally catch a live stream. Yeah, I'm glad you're able to catch one. I have been trying to make a habit of tagging everybody in the Mancers Union Discord when I do these streams now, after you had requested it. And I will say, what was I going to say? I will say, like, it's been a chatty couple of days in the Mancers Union. We've been having a lot of stuff to discuss. And that's what I wanted to say. Like, for any of y'all watching, if you're not a part of the Mancers Union Discord server, there should be the link tree in the description for this stream. Should have a link to it. It's available to anybody who wants to come in. Mostly, we just share music, talk about a lot of wild stuff. I say wild. I mean, it was like spirituality and metaphysics, or like, or whatever, like, whatever terror, like, Verb wants to go on, basically. It's fun. Um, it's very fun. So anyway, I bring all that up because we have been on we have been on a tear about a lot of different philosophical subjects, I guess. I don't know how else to put it. Like, mostly discussing. Well, it mostly started off with this really interesting conversation that somebody brought up, where they felt like their impression of like a lot of Eastern philosophies. So, like, in particular, the two main culprits that they brought up was Buddhism and Taoism. I think there was one other, but I can't remember. I can't remember. Like, it might have been Hinduism. I can't remember. Anyway, and, my response to that was like, well, that's very different from my understanding of it. And I just kind of like divulged sort of my general understanding of Taoism. Not so much Buddhism because I actually don't. I mean, I have like the most elementary understanding of Zen, which I don't know. I mean, a lot of Zen people would say that's enough. That's all you really need to know. But regardless, like I don't have the historical understanding, the full historical understandings for Zen. I also don't fully understand like how it interrelates with like Buddhism as a larger practice. And so I couldn't speak with the same sort of clarity and certainty on that. But Taoism, I should also say with some, you know, reservations that like I'm by no means an expert on Taoism. Lee asks, "Is it just me? Or Peepaw got that JoJo pose?" Yeah, he does. I'm working on an episode. I'm actually working on kind of a special episode, Lee. Because it's going to be a longer one, and it's titled Peepaw's Quest, and he's gonna do some. I don't know. I mean, not necessarily JoJo stuff, but like some like pretty intense action stuff, which I'm sure you'll probably get a little bit more exposure to as I'm drawing this. Yeah, he does have that JoJo energy. But yeah, it's been an interesting conversation to have because it's kind of allowed me to like word vomit all of my reading and like studying and like learning that I've been doing in Taoism. And it's actually a very interesting thing because for me, like, um, Taoism is about the closest I've come in a long time where it's like, oh, like I could potentially see myself as an adherent to this thing. And like, I kind of am an adherent in some ways, but like, if you ask, like, Matt, are you a practicing Taoist? And it's like, well, I practice Tai Chi, I practice Qigong, like, um, I'm not planning on like necessarily attaining my eighth energy body anytime soon, or like, um, becoming a hermit and releasing myself to the mountains of Colorado or the Appalachians, to discover my inner light body. Not anytime soon. Maybe in this lifetime, who knows. Anyway, I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm a practicing Taoist. Um, but I am studying it pretty intensely because there's a lot in it that I appreciate. There's a lot in it that interests me, and it's one of the first times I've read stuff where it's like, oh, this actually communicates pretty well stuff that I have thought or felt for a long time. I just haven't really put into words. And usually when I come across something like that, like, oh, it gets my interest pretty hard, right? Like it like suddenly that's where my fascination will go, right? And like I am probably I think it would be fair to say that like my personality, at least until the last couple of years, has been like a pretty kind of like an intense sort of seeker personality. And so when I say seeker, like somebody who's like looking for the truth or looking for some sort of spiritual something or other, right? Like some kind of connection to the divine or like I don't know, whatever, right? And as part of that, like, you know, long-term seeking project, I have applied a general overall philosophy in my life that is inspired by stuff that I've read in books written by Robert Anton Wilson and Timothy Leary, and they have this idea of like what they call the eight circuit model of consciousness. And they're not the only ones who are proponents of it. There are other people who have adopted that system, but in like different ways. But anyway, I'm going to try and keep it I'm going to try and not like get too deep into that rabbit hole, but just sort of like briefly explain like the eight circuit model of consciousness has like these sort of levels that you explore openly and sort of on your own time, your own dime, right? Like it's just sort of like, look, you do your thing, but this is sort of how you, if you find yourself in this position of being a seeker type personality, this might be the route you go. And so within that system of thought, I have been going around sort of like the what is called like the circuit 5 neurosomatic level. Oh no, not yeah, it is neurosomatic. And that's what got me into like Tai Chi and a couple other things. Well, it's been very interesting. Like I've learned a lot. I've had a lot of like really interesting sort of revelations, personal experiences. And I've talked about this on social media a little bit, but like I don't know, the last couple of years are the first time really 37 and 38. Like these years are the first times I've really felt at home in my body. Um and that's been like a really interesting experience for me. So I think that's part of the reason why I have like this particular current fondness for Taoism is like, oh, well, you know, this particular philosophy helped me find this connection to my body that I didn't have. Like I feel somewhat at home with my nervous system and all this other stuff. Things that, you know, like I think most people go through on some level or another where they feel uncomfortable with their nervous system, uncomfortable with their body, uncomfortable with sort of like whatever it is that's going on for them in their life. And oh, you know what? I'm gonna cheat. I was originally, I don't know, maybe I'm not gonna cheat. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I kind of like I'm trying to figure out if I want the line work here to be like more squiggly and organic, or if I want to like use the Clip Studio speed lines that are like super straight, right? Part of the reason why I'm thinking about not using the Clip Studio cheats is because I've already done this. I've already done a more organic type line on another panel, so I'm thinking to myself, keep it consistent. Because what I can communicate here, I know I've totally veered off from what I was talking about earlier, but oh well. What I can communicate here is a sort of like, what's the word? Like broken down atmosphere, which is what I'm trying to communicate like in this environment, because it's like a abandoned industrial zone. And so to properly communicate that, like you kind of want to like to properly communicate. I'm trying to take out the like kind of wanna type stuff. I'm gonna get back to what you were saying, John, in just a moment. Let me finish this thought real quick. To properly communicate this broken down feeling that I have in this atmosphere, I think everything should be sort of organic and look sort of like scrawly and squiggly and like, you know, decayed, if that makes sense. So even some of the line work should be that way. So John Durrett says, I started up on that book again. It comes across as taking each chakra and reimagining them as circuits with possible Western values and Friedman slips. Yeah, that's I would say that's a very good like summary of sort of. I think you're talking about Prometheus Rising. I'm going to assume you're talking about Prometheus Rising because I remember recommending that book to you some time ago. Um, and there's a lot of so like in regards to that book and that particular model, that 8 circuit model, there's a lot of controversy over sort of like the isomorphic perspective it has because you could also say that that 8 circuit thing doesn't just come from like Hindu chakra system but also from the Taoists have like an eightfold system and the Buddhists have an eightfold system. And then that also can tie into the octaves, right? Which is like, I can't remember who, some Greek philosopher came up with the whole octave thing. I can't remember if that was Pythagoras or like Plato, somebody. I can't remember. I'm not particularly great. I'm not, I'm not fond of a lot of the Greek philosophers for reasons I actually cannot figure out. They're fine. They just don't aesthetically appeal to me, I think. And I think a lot of like Greco-Roman philosophical stuff, it's just, I don't know. It's the way it carries itself. I think I find frustrating or annoying or like vaguely repulsed by it. Even though I do kind of like Plato and I do kind of like Aristotle a little bit, but like I don't know, something about the ancient Greeks. Anyway, I'm having a lot of thoughts on that actually. Here's the thing about the ancient Greeks. They like to party, they like to think, they like to go to war, they liked art, and they were all good at all of it, but like a lot of their philosophers I just find annoying because they're very egocentric. Like all of their philosophers are super egocentric. And I've just kind of always been, you know what it is? They remind me too much of YouTubers. Like this is totally making sense to me now. Like so many of the ancient Greek philosophers remind me too much of YouTubers, and I feel like they would actually like fit in really well in this day and age. Like Socrates would rock Twitter. Like Socrates would be the most edgelord like Twitter dude. Like the most edgelord like YouTube influencer, and I think that reality just irks me a little bit, and it's very difficult for me to not see that with a lot of the Greeks. But anyway, I don't know if that's their fault. That's just sort of the ground that they grew from. What can you do? So anyway, but speaking personally from my own aesthetic and like cultural exposure, I don't remember why I got on that exactly, but anyway, yeah, for whatever reason, like, oh, so let's go back to, because originally we were talking about Prometheus Rising. Um, yeah, so that book in particular really got me on the route that I've been intellectually for a long time. Because I really liked the model. I really liked sort of how it sets up a way to learn and seek and find out and like and discover what is like best for you as a set of principles to live a life by, because it's very much like centered, the whole general model is centered around the idea of no two people are going to have the same like experience, right? No two people are going to have the exact same model that works for them. It's all going to be. John Durrett says, "Oh, you could totally make a comic poking fun at them." I'm assuming he's talking about the ancient Greeks by bringing them into today's systems. Yeah, you know that would be kind of fun. Like I've thought about this a lot, which is that it's actually really kind of weird, but like from a historical perspective, but like Joe Rogan is basically Plato. Like he is our day's Plato. Um, I don't know if everybody would feel like they understood that or want to accept that, but that's pretty much. Lee says, I despise the day I wasn't born in some English speaking country. I feel like that's an unfinished sentence. I want to understand, but I can't. I'm sorry. We can make the conversation a little less intense. um, I'll just say like, yeah, it was a lot of like heavy kind of philosophical stuff. Um, well, I'll finish off by saying like, yeah, I mean, I do kind of think that Joe Rogan might be our current day's Plato, and like, I don't know if it's for better or worse. And I'm also like, who is the current day Socrates then? Um, I don't know. But anyway, a lot of a lot of interesting things happening in our day and age, and a lot of that being sort of like we have such an openness right now. Everybody has a big there's a big openness to ideas, right? And there's a big openness to what is possible, but it's all kind of argumentative and debative. And so once again, this is sort it's really interesting. Like our modern age really is very similar to like ancient Athens. And apparently very similar to like another period in ancient China where there was just like a bunch of philosophers coming about all at once, which was apparently like the era that like Lao Tzu and um, Confucius and like all these other people were coming around. John Dredd says, you mentioned several cultures of thought which use an 8-level system. Makes me want to investigate if they are saying the same thing about each level, but in slightly different ways. So I will say that um, I have this suspicion, and I don't know if this is true, but I have this suspicion that Taoism extended itself from Hinduism, or vice versa, because there are some very big similarities in how their systems work. Now, I would say that there's some areas where they kind of get shuffled about a bit, or like it's not a one-to-one translation, you know? Um, so, like, as an example, I would say in Chinese medicine, they don't have like an 8 chakra system like yoga does, where it's like you say there's a part of your body and that's sort of like a center for the energy, right? Like you got your third eye, you got your throat chakra, your heart chakra, etc. Whereas in Taoism, the centers of it, there's only 3 centers of energy in terms of where you would more intensely practice it, and it's like the lower dantian, whatever the heart is, I can't remember what it's called. It was like the heart mind. I think it's the upper dantian. I don't remember. And then basically the third eye. But then Taoism has this notion of like your light bodies or your energy bodies. And there's 8 of the energy bodies, and the energy bodies are basically like, I don't know, it's almost like if chakras were like your aura instead of like it's a particular section of your body, it's like a shell, like an energy shell around your body. That's the best way I could possibly describe it right now as somebody who like only vaguely understands the concept. Um so I mean I would say in my when I was comparing I was like, "Oh yeah, like they are very similar." To the point I was like, "Okay, one like Hinduism or Taoism took something from the other, or maybe they like inter exchanged culturally or whatever. I don't know. With the Greeks, I'm not as certain. You know, like I don't know. I don't know where they got their stuff from. Maybe they did. Maybe they did have cultural exchange with those other cultures, and like I just don't know, right? I have no clue. But it is pretty fascinating. I'll say that much. It is super fascinating. So I would say it is definitely worth investigating into because you will probably find some interesting stuff. At the very least, and for me, like what I'm most interested in defining and finding out about is like what is the history? Like, is there a historical trace that you could make and you could go, oh, okay, here's how this line of thought influenced that line of thought, et cetera, et cetera. John Drett says languages affect the makeup of the circuits in the mind. How we go about processing information is tied to the concepts we have had ingrained into us. That's why some concepts just don't translate. Yeah, that's true. I want to reread that to make sure I fully understand it. How we go about processing information is tied to the concepts. Yes, we have ingrained into us. Well, not just that, but like, um, I'm sorry, Lee. Like, we've gone into the deep end. Um, so, different languages also operate differently, right? And this is something that I've like been learning in regards to sort of learning a little bit about the Chinese written language, like the ancient Chinese written language. It's so different from like phonetic alphabet, right? Because the phonetic alphabet is, you know, A represents the sound of A. It doesn't represent anything else, right? B represents the sound ba, but it doesn't represent anything else. Whereas, like, I'm probably, hopefully, this is the right symbol. I don't remember the name of the symbol is, but it represents like it can represent person, it can represent strength, it can represent man, it can represent like a bunch of different things. And uh, it can represent a bunch of different things. So like the way you would use it in your language is so totally different from how you would use the letter A or the letter B, right? Like it's almost more like a picture than it is a letter as we think about letters. So, you know, when you see like this applies not just to the Chinese language but the Japanese language. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about other Asian languages, but particularly Chinese and Japanese, because I know that a lot of the Japanese language is extended from ancient Chinese written language. Um, a lot of it is very contextual, very metaphorical, and so people don't necessarily speak in sounds, they speak in concepts, which is still like I have a hard time wrapping my head around that, right? It would be maybe akin to if the only way I talk to y'all like literally the only way I could talk to y'all was just through like comic strips, right? Um and maybe has some kinship with like Egyptian hieroglyphics, because Egyptian hieroglyphics sort of work in that way too, but it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different. Because as far as I'm aware, they do have kind of a phonetic system. They're like a weird, like hieroglyphics are weird because it's like it's both kind of phonetic and ideographic, right? So like an ideogram is going back to what I showed you earlier, right? Of that, like that's an ideogram. It's not a letter, although it has a sound that's associated with it, but the sound is more like a word than it is like a phonetic sound. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't know. So anyway, that the nature of that, right? For any particular language that you're raised in changes how you relate to the world around you and how you relate to concepts and what kind of concepts you might be more predisposed to as well. So I've heard it's been argued in the past that like Western society is really predisposed to concepts like science and capitalism and like industrialization and things like that because the nature of the phonetic language makes it such that from the ground up you think of things as being atomized and like also very replaceable. So like it's easier to think of things as not in a non-specific context because your entire written language is set up in a way where it is very like I don't know, it's like typeset, right? Like you can just kind of take things in, put things back. There's not necessarily like an intensive skill in the same way that's required to do it. Whereas, I mean, let's go back to the ancient Egyptians, right? If you were an ancient Egyptian scribe, you were basically as valuable to the kingdom as like the highest level wizard programmer. Like you were basically a programmer in that society, but like you were an extremely important asset because not too many people were scribes, not too many people understood hieroglyphics, read hieroglyphics, like could write hieroglyphics. Like it was an extremely high level system of writing, right? And I mean like just the way their whole thing worked, right? Like their whole way of keeping records of history and records of their philosophies and stuff. Like it was so crucial and essential and important to them that they spent like these hundreds of years projects to build these things so that they could have records basically. I mean in some way like the pyramids and like all the relics that we have today, all the antiquities that we have today that remains of the ancient Egyptian kingdoms are almost like millennia old comic books that they just left laying out in the desert, and they're like, well, this is our remaining record of our culture, the things that were important to us, and of you know what we worshipped, what we thought was the highest ideal, how we organized our society, etc., etc. Anyway, in their society, it was very different from ours, right? It was highly ordered, um, is extremely hierarchical in ways that are very different from how we have hierarchies in our current day and age. Um, is very magical. Is another part of it. You could say spiritual instead, but like basically like ritualistic magic was an important part of their society, um, because it was how they felt like they were able to communicate with the universe and use that connection to do things. Well, I don't know what the things were, but do things, right? Um, but that was all built into the language of like hieroglyphics and the Egyptian language. Like there's an entire cast of people developed to keep the language, to keep up the traditions of the language and to evolve the language, right? Like that was the priest class in Egypt. Um, and so that's another huge difference between like those kind of older languages and like let's say the phonetic alphabet or um, like hiragana or katakana in Japanese, or like the Korean alphabet, from what I understand. Like they were all developed to be popularized. They were all developed to be understood by children, so that like they could teach children faster, and they could have a greater amount of like cultural diversity, and more people were able to do more stuff more quickly, if that makes sense what I'm saying, right? Like there's more mobility, right? Both upward and laterally. So like a person, if a person could both be a blacksmith and a scribe, or a person could be a swordsman or a cook, because there are ways now to like learn multiple things quickly or more quickly, because they could be abstracted more easily. That's the power of language, right? But that's also kind of going back to your original point, John, about how languages affect the makeup of our circuits in our brain. Our circuit, I'll put quotes on that, but on our consciousness, whatever, what have you. Wait, we are deliberately impacted by our language and by the modes in which our language is distributed, right? Like, I think it's a very interesting aspect of modern day society. A lot of our language is distributed strictly through text. Not all of it, right? Like, what you and I are engaged in right now is like a really curious thing that didn't exist pretty much at any other time in society, where like I'm able to engage with you audio visually, and you're able to engage with me with text. And so it's a very, I mean, it does kind of create a weird dynamic, right? Where it's like I play sort of a, I play sort of a leadership role in this, right? Because like I have the more, what's the word, like immersive form of interacting with you, and you have the less immersive form of interacting with me, just because there is a certain amount of remove when it comes to text. So it does sort of create, it's a weird part about it's a weird part about YouTube streaming when you think about it, where it's like it does create sort of a divide, but then it also I think to me, part of the reason why that exists and why it is that way is that's how you're able to talk to many, many different people from around the world all at once and like manage it, right? Like anybody could potentially manage that, which gets into an even deeper and harder for me to explain sort of idea of like, so like everything we just discussed in regards to language, that you can take those same sort of ideas and systems and apply them to media, right? Which I think was kind of Marshall McLuhan's point, was that, you know, the kind of media, and in some sense like media is language, but it's like applied language, if that makes sense. In the same way that like technology is sort of like applied language, or like the way you live your life is like applied language. But anyway, that's a finer point I'm not really sure how to make. John Dress says, "We hear voices in your head. That's about it." Oh no. Not more. I don't need more voices in my head. But I mean that is kind of illustrating the point I was trying to make though, right? Where it's like in terms of that interaction, like when you're talking to people on Discord or Twitter or Facebook or whatever, I even kind of realized I saved Facebook because Facebook is like heretical in my brain. Like I don't like Facebook, but it's not anything. It doesn't matter. Anyway, point is the way language functions has multiple tiers to it, right? And so that equally applies to media. And so the media that you interact with on a daily basis impacts sort of like how you think, what you think about, the level of intensity on which you think about a subject. So like, let's say that you're the kind of person who, you know, you play Candy Crush on your smartphone while you're streaming, a Twitch stream on your desktop, while you're also playing like a slower board game digitally, on the other screen on your desktop, while you're also like streaming, Taylor Swift to listen to in the middle of all that, which some people do that kind of thing. But that kind of immersive, like media immersiveness, creates a very different, it creates a very different brain. I'll just say very literally, like it creates a very different brain from somebody who might just like, lie in bed stoned and listen to Fleetwood Mac's Tusk from beginning to end. Right? Like those are two totally different mindsets, and they have two totally different, not just mindsets, those are two totally different physically formed brains that are interacting in the world in two totally different ways. And both of those brains are shaped in the ways that they interact with media, and also how the media interacts with them. That's like the other aspect of it too, right? Like, and that's the new part of our day and age, is that we don't just interact with media. Media now interacts with us. I say this as I'm talking to y'all, and using a camera that is like an AI modified camera. Like I don't know, no, it will. Like it interacts with me. It follows me around without me saying or thinking or doing anything about it. And this is the first time and age in which, like, y'all are able to watch something on your TV or your smartphone or on your computer, and you can interact with it, whether it's me or like a Twitch streamer or even just any YouTube video, right? Like, I don't know how many times I've watched a YouTube video and then like somewhere midway through watching the YouTube videos, I'm like, I'm actually more interested in seeing what the audience for this video has to say or think about this subject, because it'll help give me some context about, like, you know, what do other people think about this? What is their sort of take on this? That's so completely different from, I mean, how I interacted with media, you know, back in the day when I was a child. Because back in the day when I was a child, I plug in my Nintendo Entertainment System. That's it. Like, that's what I'm doing, right? There's no other form of entertainment or media that I'm interacting with. It's just me and Ninja Gaiden 2. Or it's just me and Tailspin. That game was alright. Or like, or Contra, or whatever, right? Or, you know, if I was watching TV as a child, like, that's it. That's what I'm doing. I'm just watching TV. I'm just like, you know, watching Batman the Animated Series, and there's literally nothing else that I'm doing. Well, unless I'm drawing. Maybe I'm drawing. But, like, that's what I was doing. But I was never able to interact with any of those things, right? There was never like a two-way conversation between me and Ninja Gaiden 2. There's never a two-way conversation between me and the creators of Ninja Gaiden 2. There's never a two-way conversation between, you know, me and the directorial or animation staff from Batman the Animated Series. It was just literally like, here's your entertainment, and that's it. Not save says up, up, down, down, left, right, BA start. That was that was about the extent of your ability to, like, you know, negotiate with your media at that time. Was cheat codes. Or Game Genie. I did a fair amount of Game Genie when I was a kid because I was a very lazy kid. I don't think I beat a lot of video games when I was a child. Not save says Contra, baby. I don't think I beat any, like, okay. I didn't start beating video games until towards the end of the Super Nintendo era. Not save says same here, Game Shark. Ah, the Game Shark. Um, in fact, I think, okay, well, the first game I ever beat all the way through was either Donald Duck's Molly Mallard on the Super Nintendo, or it was Mega Man X, and I can't remember which one it was. It was one of those two games. And then after that, I started beating games all the time, but games became easier. Like, you know, Super Mario 64, Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, like, those aren't, compared to, like, NES era games, right? Those aren't, like, necessarily difficult games because they're designed to be played through, because they're designed to be a story, right? And that was, like, the big difference between that era of gaming. Like, between the big difference from the 64 era gaming onward and before that was that suddenly there was a huge emphasis on the game being a completable story, being more cinematic, you know. Whereas previous to that, it was like a game was more like a game. Like, you either beat it or you didn't, right? And if you didn't beat the game ever, too bad, right? Like, get a Game Genie, get a Game Shark, learn some cheat codes, buy an issue of What was the name of that magazine? Was it Tricks and Tips or Game Pro? I think it was Game Pro. It was one of them. Anyway, there was a magazine. I can't remember what the name of it was, but the entire magazine. This tells you so much about like how things have evolved. There was a magazine whose entire purpose for being distributed was every month they released cheat codes in like maybe that was Tricks and Tips in like ways to beat games. That was the whole purpose of it. And I remember like my cousin would get issues of it, and whenever I went to go visit him and like spend the night and like hang out over the weekend, I would just like read through the magazine to see if I saw anything that I needed to learn about, oh, there's a cheat code for, Mortal Kombat, or like, oh, so that's how you beat Mega Man X, et cetera, et cetera. Um, I mean, nowadays it's so different. Not Save says, compared to Super Ghosts and Ghouls, even Ocarina of Time's Water Temple wasn't too hard. Yeah, I agree. Not Save says, Tricks and Tips sounds familiar. I think that's the name. That was the name of the magazine. There might have been multiple as well. Because for some reason, I also think Game Pro was another kind of one of those magazines. I just can't remember very well because my memory has like faded a little bit on that subject. It's just been so long ago, and like the culture's changed so much, right? Because those magazines started slowly going out of style as soon as the game FAQs board became a thing, which was a huge, I mean, no pun intended, it was a huge game changer for everybody, because then, everybody was in on the conversation on like, oh, here's how you beat this game. Um, or here's like some cheat codes, et cetera, et cetera. Which I do have to say, I am fond of the game FAQs era. We've kind of grown out of even that nowadays because most games have been designed to be beatable in a way that is like, I would almost argue is going a little too far, because a lot of the games have kind of lost their edge, but that's just me personally. Like, I'm the kind of person like Haley Petra says, fully intend your puns, sir. Commit. Commit to your puns. Um, like, I get it. Like, gaming studios aren't going to make as much money if their games are less accessible, but also, like, games should be for everybody on some level, right? I'm just saying, I don't mind it when people make like a Dark Souls type game, or like a bullet hell shooter, or something that's kind of ridiculously difficult. I enjoy those kinds of games. I kind of feel like the Nintendo 64 era hit a sweet medium where it was like you had a lot of games that were difficult or tough, but they were never so tough or so difficult that they were just like you would never be able to beat it. It was just like, oh, you just need to put in a little time into it and you'll beat it. I mean, that wasn't the case for all of them, I guess. Like, there were some PlayStation games that were just brutal. And there were some Nintendo 64 games that were pretty brutal too. But like, that really did start to shift. I would say around the shift was really noticeable in the PlayStation 3 era. And that was actually coincidentally the era where I just stopped playing games almost entirely. Like, around the PlayStation 3 era, I just was like becoming less and less interested. Like, I played Dark Souls 2, I believe. And then after that, I was like kind of no, it was Demon Souls. I think it was Demon Souls. I think it was Demon Souls I played, and then after that, I was like, I guess I'm done. Like, I just didn't have the capacity, I guess, or just like the games became like after those Souls game, I was just like, I don't feel necessarily challenged in the same way by the games that are coming out. I was also getting burnt out on like stories in games. I know that's probably a super like controversial take or whatever, because I know a lot of people really enjoy playing games exclusively for their story, right? Like, I know that that's what has made games like The Last of Us very popular with people, or like I don't know, the new God of War games. I don't know. There are others. I just don't know what they are because I'm that out of touch, I think, with that scene. But I just really started. I don't know. There was a point where I was just like, I don't really care about the story in video games so much anymore, and that is really not at the fault of the people who like write these stories or do that work necessarily, because they're doing the work. They're doing a lot of hard work to make these games interesting, entertaining, have well developed stories. I just am not biting. Like, I'm just not biting on that sandwich for whatever reason. And I think for me, I'm trying not to turn this into another spiel in which I talk about the virtues of Star Fox 64. I think for me, like, it was just like cutscenes were really taking me out of the game. Having to read huge blocks of text really takes me out of the game. Um, Literally anything where you just have to like stop and have a conversation. Like, I just could not get into like people love the Mass Effect games, and there are things about the Mass Effect games I find really cool and interesting. I just never got into the whole like talking with people in a video game. I'm just like, if I want to talk with people, I'll leave my house and have a conversation with a real human being, and like maybe try and get into a romantic relationship with them so I can get the actual good ending in my life rather than in Mass Effect. Not Save says, I know that feeling. It feels like I have to force myself to play short, story rich experiences that are clearly well made, tearjerkers made with heart. I can't figure why I can't make myself play them, despite having already bought them. And then Not Save says, "Yo, Star Fox 64 is my jam." It was also my jam, and I'm having to be careful with myself because I don't want to get myself into like old man territory where I'm like, Star Fox 64 was the last great game. I mean, that's not really true, but it was a really, really good one. Like, it was a very good one. It was very good. Like, I don't know if I can emphasize enough how good that game was. It has a rent-free place in my heart, probably until the day I die. And it's largely based on the fact that it was just well done on every single level, which very rarely happens in games, where it's just like every single aspect was done in such a way where it was easily accessible, it was intriguing, it was challenging, but at the level that you found appropriate to challenge yourself with. There was reasons to replay it that weren't just like story reasons, but there were story reasons to replay it. There were actual game mechanic reasons to replay it. There were very cool unlockables to replay it. And as the game got harder, it actually unfolded not necessarily new game mechanics, but like the game mechanics matured in a way where you actually really had to pay attention to what you were doing, and you had to really develop a skill in that game. And I love that kind of stuff. Like, on every level, I felt rewarded the more I played the game. And I think that's kind of an issue that I have with this more cinematic focused version of game design that exists now. It's like you're not necessarily rewarded to replay the game. You're more like, sometimes you are, sometimes you aren't. It depends on the game. You're more like, or it's just like the way you're rewarded I don't like. Like, it doesn't feel interactive in the same way. It's like in modern gaming, the way you're rewarded is like, oh, well, you got an achievement. It's like, what's an achievement? Well, we're just gonna say you did this thing. Okay, great. Does it do anything? No, but you get an achievement. Or like, you get further in the story, or like your your character gets to date this person, or like, oh, you get a new skin. I was like, okay, well, I mean that's cool. I can't even read the full sentence and I already know what you're saying. Not Save says number one game mechanics to replay the sunglasses. Yeah, I can't. Was that beating it on expert mode? Because I got that and I can't remember. I think it was beating Star Fox 64 on expert mode. You unlock. You, Fox gets glasses, sunglasses, but technically it's kind of a nod to his dad. Um, it was a cool little nod. Like it was kind of like, okay, like now Fox has sunglasses. It doesn't really. It bears zero it bears zero mechanical influence on the game, but it is like a cool flex because you know your friends can come over and you're like, hey, guess what I did? And they're like, whoa, what? Yeah, that's right. I beat it on expert. Um, like Star Fox 64 is one of the few games where like I so completely demolished the game on every single level possible, and I would still go back and replay it because it's just that much fun, and it's just that like it's that rewarding of an experience to play. And it did something that you know that few games do, where it's like it's an arcade style game but there are so many different paths you can take while playing the game that you have this amount of freedom that you don't normally have in most video games. Not Played says, I think it was getting medals on each planet. Oh, you know what? I bet it was. And then Not Safe says, but maybe it was an expert. You know, it probably is the medals. It was like, I know one of them it was like um, you unlock the rocket launcher in multiplayer mode, which was actually like it was really funny unlockable too because like the rocket launcher, you know, like you can play as Slippy or Peppy or Fox or Falco with rocket launchers, and it's actually kind of terrible but annoying to like your opponents. It was a really interesting little thing that they did. There's just so many things. Not Save says sunglasses offer no tactical advantages whatsoever. Snake. They just look cool. But yeah, I'm look, this channel could easily just turn into a Star Fox 64 memorial because all right, here's the thing that would have to happen. If this thing happened, y'all would see me disappear for probably a good 3 to 6 months. Nintendo releases like an honest to god spiritual successor or sequel to Star Fox 64. Not Star Fox Zero with like the copter or even like the chicken thing, you know, the chicken wing, which I actually don't mind. I think that's a cool thing that they did, but it didn't really gameplay wise, it just seemed like it slowed things down and didn't necessarily, you know, make it more interesting. Um, if Nintendo did that, I would for real disappear for like several months. Like y'all would just be like, "What happened to Matt?" Some of y'all would know, some would not. Or maybe I would just stream it. Like maybe that's what would become of my life is I would just stream it 24/7 on my channel until I like completed everything. Um, there are a couple other games that I feel this way about, but probably Star Fox 64 is the one that I feel the most strongly about. Um, there is one other game that I can think of off the top of my head, which is Bangai-O. That game is a lot of fun. Bangai-O is another one where I will just go all in. Advance Wars Dual Strike. Also another game that pretty much consumed my entire life for, you know, a good 3 to 6 months. In that one, I was able to like look at how much time I logged in on it, and it was upwards of 400 hours. I don't know what I was doing for 400 hours in that game, but I did it. Like I unlocked every single thing possible on Advance Wars because I just loved the hell out of the game. Um, what else in the Matt Rainwater catalog? Um, would I openly recommend? There are some that I would recommend, but not openly. I'm trying to think. Like after Dreamcast era. Ooh, okay. Here's one. What the hell is it called? I have to remind myself every time what this game is called, and it's really good. And it's actually the closest thing I can think of to an honest to God like Star Fox 64 successor. Um, a PS2 game where you fly around and shoot things. I got one French. It's like very French inspired. What is the name of that game? Oh, it makes me sad that I can't remember what the name of the game was. Give me a second, y'all. Not Save says, as much as I love Star Fox 64, Banjo Kazooie, and Majora's Mask were my holy trinity of gameplay that inspired me. Yeah, Majora's Mask is a game that was actually like wildly ahead of its time. Like, I'm kind of surprised more people haven't tried that sort of game design because like it is the only Legend, I'll say that, like it's the only Legend of Zelda game that's like that, where it's like you're in a world where the clock repeats itself every 3 days, and so you have to become very attuned and aware to the environment that you're inhabiting, because that's how you solve puzzles in that world. That's how you like understand the inner workings of like relationships in a town. That's how you like do everything in the game, and it's so completely like it's still to this day I think in a lot of ways very original. I think I might be able to find the name of this game that I'm thinking of, and I'm kicking myself because I cannot remember the name of it. Sky Gunner. Oh my god, I can never remember the name of that game. Sky Gunner is super good. It was a sleeper hit of a game on the PlayStation 2, and it is the closest that I've seen a game come to in capturing sort of the atmosphere and the like style of Star Fox 64. Even though it's not necessarily like an on-rail shooter game, there's a lot of like open area type events in that game. But it does a lot of Skygunner does a lot of stuff that really feels like an evolution of the kind of game design in Star Fox 64. And the world is really cool. It's a completely different world because it's like a steampunk, like very French inspired kind of world. It's very cutesy and like whimsical, but it's super fun. The music's great. It's very challenging. It's very difficult. It has a pretty like intense and rewarding scoring system. So in other words, like it's another one of those games where it's like the more time you put into it, the more you get out of it. Not Save says MM, referring to Majora's Mask, had a deeply existential dread underpinning everything and everyone's behavior, and I bet it helped set me on this path. I didn't, and it's funny that you mentioned that. Like, I think I played that game too young. Like, I think I need to play that game again. Because I didn't really understand any of that stuff until looking back. Like I knew there was a lot of stuff in that game that creeped me out and like haunted me while playing the game, but it wasn't super conscious when I was like taking it in. I was just kind of like when I was playing that game, I was just like I want to beat this game, right? It's like, oh, it's a new Zelda game. I want to beat it and like, all that stuff. And I didn't really fully take in and understand the game until much later on when I was older and I was like, "Oh, so that's what that was about." Like that game is worth a replay for me and I need to take some time to play it again because it is one where it's just Not Save was saying super existential. Not Save says, "I'll give Skygunner a try sometimes. I can find it. Or if I can find it. Yeah, it was published by Atlas, which is I don't know. Most things published by Atlas are generally super niche and like kind of hard to find. They always did like very limited publishings for their games. But that one in particular was extremely niche. Like I remember having a hard time finding copies of it, and I had to really hunt it down. Pretty sure Atlas is still kicking though, and they're still publishing some stuff these days. But I know a lot of the stuff that they kind of specialize in is more like Japanese RPG type stuff. A lot of strategy RPGs. I remember that they published the Disgaea series back in the PS2 days. Disgaea was one of those games I should have liked, but I could never get into because it was too overwrought. Like it was just like there's too many options. There's too many like highly complicated, difficult to engage with strategies. And there was also just an incredible amount of grind in that game, and I was just like, I'm done with grinding. Like I got. When did I stop? When did I lose my fascination with grinding in RPGs? What game ended that for me? I'm trying to remember because there was a particular game I played where I was just like, I'm done with this. It was probably Persona 3. As much as I love Persona 3, there you do have to do a fair amount of grinding in that game to beat like the later dungeons. Like if you want to do like if you want to get like the super Luciferian ending where like you join the devil and stuff, you had to grind a bit to like beat Lucifer's dungeon. I remember that dungeon was kind of a pain in the butt too. Because by the time you get into that dungeon, like you're pretty much maxed out your team for the most part, and at that point you're just gaining levels, and the gaining of the levels really doesn't do that much. So it feels kind of empty. And I think I should have beaten that game has like 5 or 6 different endings, and I should have beaten one of the more like easier to attain endings the first round so that I could better enjoy that game because the ending that I went for made it like a 50 to 60 hour playthrough, and by the time I was done with everything I was exhausted and I was kind of like, "Oh, why did I do that?" Like also like the super secret special ending in that game is not that good. Like it's just like, "Oh, okay. You've joined sides with the devil. You're going to go fight God and his kingdom." And I was like, "Okay, well, that's that's pretty much what I thought would happen, and that's it. Like, there's no big surprises. Like, I don't know. I like Persona 3 overall as an experience. And it's a very cool story, and it has my favorite thing about Persona 3. If I had to describe Persona 3 to somebody who has never played a Shin Megami Tensei game, imagine Pokemon, but all the Pokemon are mythological figures, and you basically get to decide on what the the new universe you're going to build is going to look like. Like, what is the philosophical underpinning of that universe? What is the like it's a game that requires you to actually think about what are your philosophical what is your philosophical value system? And you make choices in that game that are basically like in line with that. So the people that you build alliances with are like, basically represent different philosophical systems. Different like there's kind of a might makes right person. There's a person who's very like Buddhist. There's a person who's very like solipsist. And then there's the devil, and and I think there's also like kind of a pseudo Christian route you can take in that game too, or something like that. Anyway, but but all of those things sort of get interlaced and worked into the storyline, and also worked into the game mechanics a little bit in really interesting ways. And unlike Pokemon, Persona 3 actually has like a very interesting system by which you upgrade your characters, and like you fuse characters together to make new characters so they don't evolve. They're just like, there's a point where you go like, oh, this Japanese forest spirits really hit its limit on like its usefulness and impact, so I'm gonna meld it with this with not Dionysus, with this other like fairy spirit, and that'll make Dionysus. And Dionysus actually does have a pretty good move set. I think I rocked him on my final team, in fact. I might be wrong about that. My final team was Beelzebub, Metatron. I don't remember who the last person was. The last person might have been Dionysus, but I can't remember. He has like a really good Dionysus has like a really good, I think it was either a poison move, or it might have been just debilitate, which was like the best move in the game. I can't remember, but anyway, it's another one of those RPGs like Final Fantasy VI, where it's like you kind of find what is the best move in the game, and you give every single character the best move in the game, and that's how you beat the game. So like, in Final Fantasy VI, it's Ultima, right? You just teach everybody. I think that's the name of it. Was it Ultima? I don't know. It was just like I can't remember what the name of the move was in Final Fantasy VI, but it was like, here's just the best attack damage move, and it just does a bajillion damage to everything on the screen, and that's all you're gonna use, right? In Persona 3, and what I thought was kind of curious, like the best move in the game is called Debilitate, and what it does is it just lowers all the stats on your opponents. I can't remember if it was on the entire team or on just one person. I don't remember, but it was of such effectiveness that basically there was a point in the game where that was just how you started every boss fight. Is you just had everybody in your team just do Debilitate back to back to back, so that the boss that you were fighting was so like statistically underranked versus your team that you could just pummel them into the ground. Even with that said, though, like the final fight in that game is actually kind of difficult, even with everybody having Debilitate. But that is also another reason why I got out of like strategy RPGs and JRPGs, because like after playing that game, I was like, okay, this is kind of how they all are now, right? Like you just level up the entire team, get the best move in the game, and then that's how you beat the game. And like, if you like the story, then that's what you're in it for. You're in it to win it for the story. And the final game at which I was like, I don't think Japanese RPGs are going to get any better than this, was Digital Devil Saga 1 and 2. And I beat Digital Devil Saga 2
that story is so good that like there's several moments where I was like, you know, given to cry at like certain emotional moments. And and honestly, like the battle system in that game is not that great, but the storyline is really good. Like what I will give Digital Devil Saga is that its battle system is very quick, it's fast. So like your battles go super fast. Um, you're not like if you have to grind, grinding doesn't take that long. It's just kind of they designed that game very much to make it a story-based game. But it's like it's a JRPG, so like you're going to grind. Like you're going to grind, you're going to like walk around an overworld, you're going to navigate a map, you're going to get lost and annoyed, all that stuff that comes with most JRPGs. But the story in that game was so good that I was willing to suffer all that stuff. And so, after I beat that game, I was just like, all right, well, this is about as good as that's going to get. So I'm done. I'm never playing a JRPG ever again. And I have kept to my word. I have kept to my word. I don't know what kind of game could be created that would get me back on that wagon. I don't know. It would have to be like I don't know. That might also be a kind of game design that doesn't really appeal to people anymore. That's the other thing. Like I don't know if people even really play Japanese style RPGs in the same way these days. That might be like an artifact of the long, long ago because it does seem like most RPGs have turned into action RPGs or like first person type stuff. I don't know. I'm a little bit out of the loop on that. Like I know that there's a strategy RPG that recently came out and caught my curiosity called Unicorn Overlord. And the name alone grabbed my interest. But then when I look at the game itself, I was like, "Oh, this is a very number crunchy like strategy RPG." And fortunately, I don't think there's a lot of grinding in the game, but it does look very like I could be totally wrong. It might be kind of like Advance Wars. That was I got that impression from it. I'm gonna have to look at some more reviews of it because it is the first time in a while where I've looked at an RPG type game and gone like, oh okay, you've got my interest just a little bit. I don't know. I don't know. Because the other issue with RPGs is like they're all 30 plus hours long. And like by about the 20-hour mark, I'm usually done with playing a game. I don't care what progression I've made in it. By around the 20-hour mark, like I'm just like I can't. I can't do it anymore. Because usually by that time I'm like, oh, there's a movie I want to watch, or I should say a movie I want to go see, or there's like a book I want to start reading, or whatever. You know what though? I'm actually lying because there was a game that was designed. It was a Japanese RPG style game that I played right after I finished Trailer Park Warlock called Hylix 2, and I like that game a lot. A lot of the game is super nonsensical. It's totally like designed and in the tradition of a Japanese style RPG like Earthbound. And the thing about that game was it was like only 8 maybe 12 hours long. So that was super short. So knowing how long that game was made it very easy for me to consume, and I enjoyed consuming it. It was like it was a very fun experience to me. I don't really know why, because there's a lot of things about that game that should not work, but that game really worked for me. Maybe it was just the time of my life that I was in. I don't know, but like, I really liked the general atmosphere and world that that game inhabits. I like the music, like it has a really great soundtrack. I liked it's just most levels of that, most of the general premise of that game is really unique. John Durrett says that game was really hard for me. Was Hylix 2 really hard as in like difficult or just like hard to get into? I'm curious what you mean when you say it was really hard. Because there are some difficult battles in that game. Um, but I could also see how that game was just hard to get into. John Durrett says trippy music. It was trippy music. I really like the soundtrack in that game a lot. In fact, I don't. That game didn't really have any elements I did not like. It was it was just different, I guess. And that for whatever reason was the thing that fit for me at that time. But I could see why somebody would not be able to get into that game. It is a very specific mood, and it is a very specific like. It's a vibe, that's for sure. And I know that like not everybody would be into it for various reasons. But as far as I'm aware, Mason Lindroth is working on a third Hylix game, and I'm looking forward to it. And hopefully he does what he did with Hylix 2 and keeps it short, because that was a big part of that game for me, was that it was short. So I never felt like it never put me in this state. And this happens with longer games where it's like, you know, you get into about hour 30 and then the game stops becoming fun, even though there's totally new stuff to do. And it's just like, this is becoming like a job. And I think that's the issue with a lot of longer games is like around that 20-hour mark, a lot of video games become jobs. Like that happened to me with Hades. Like Hades was really fun right up until like the second time I beat the whole game. Because at that point I was realizing I was not interested in the story. And the game was requiring you to have to pay attention to like character dynamics and stuff. And like I just didn't enjoy it. John Durrett said, random strange words have different meanings. I couldn't keep track of them, and since they were involved in fighting, just died, gave up. Yeah. Yeah. John's referring to, in Hylix 2, like, the game does kind of force you into having to, like, basically learn another language to, like, understand how to play the game. I like that, but yeah, kind of like what I was saying. Like I could see why somebody would not be into it. It was super. It is experimental. Is how I would describe Hylix 2 and Hylix 1. They're experimental games. And I would say Hylix 2 is the first time I played an experimental game where I enjoyed it. And I had fun with it. Most experimental games are not that good. But yeah, like Hades. I'm not even gonna bother with Hades 2 because I know it's gonna be more like Hades 1. And as much as I enjoyed the John Dredd says Nerg Vlorf Argblago feed Tiffeldum. Like I remember what those meanings do. Yeah, like all that's like basically what all the attacks in Hylix 2 are like. They're just like random mishmash words. Well, even the characters' names, other than Wayne, like Wayne is literally the only thing in that game where it's like, okay, here's the ground. Like this is the only thing I can refer to that reminds me of the world I live in. And then everything else is like, you know, so super weird and disconnected from our reality. Um, like I can't even remember what the name of the other characters are because they're such weird names. Let me actually look for it real quick. Like Hylix 2 character names. Okay, so yeah, Wayne, and then Pangorma, who was the kind of weak swordsman. Like he had some useful stuff. Datus Mulm. Datus Mulm was like the poison character, kind of, in Psalms Nosa, who was kind of the healer. But yeah, the whole game is like that. John Drat says, it would have been fun if I could have gone into the mindset, but I didn't get there. Maybe when I get older and go through dementia, it will click. It kind of that game is kind of like that game is kind of like a dementia simulator. uh, like imagine getting dementia and then playing Earthbound. That's basically Hylix 2. Um, a game I enjoyed. But yeah, so like I don't know. Like I really got into roguelikes for a while and then Hades was the last one that I played. I have to say like going I don't know, this is apparently turning into the me complaining about Hades stream. But I have to say like the game mechanics themselves are really good and fun. And then it's totally weighed down by the story and the fact that you actually have to pay attention to the story. And I'm probably going to have to wrap this up in a little while because it is looking like we're going to get some really bad weather in a bit. So I want to save my progress and just make sure weather's not going to get too bad here. Because I just like looked outside and it's like, it's looking bad. Anyway. So anyway, um, like I said, like the game mechanics in Hades are super fun, but then the game requires you to have to pay attention to character dynamics, pay attention to like story stuff, and that stuff is not fun to me at all. And I get it, like there are people who really like that stuff, right? Like that's what makes games like Stardew Valley really popular, or like other games. I'm just not into that kind of genre or thing. Like it just doesn't do a lot for me. Like I said, like I'd kind of rather just do that stuff in real life and then I can win the real life game. If I'm playing the fake life game, I want to do fake life things like shooting down star cruisers and like exploding stuff. I mean that basically describes why I want to play video games at all. I either want to stack like blocks or blobs of puzzle pieces, or I want to blow things up. Or like maybe every once in a while I want to do like fighting game stuff, right? Stuff I wouldn't do in normal everyday life. Anyway, I'm gonna have to wrap it up. I don't know what the weather's gonna do here in a second, and I want to just make sure this is gonna go to hell in a handbasket in a second. So anyway, thank you everybody for hanging out. It was a lot of fun. I always enjoy just like dishing. Anyway, y'all have a good rest of your evening, day, what have you, and I'm gonna go batten down the hatches and make sure I don't know, get caught into some horrible tornado or something. Anyway, I'll talk to you later. Bye.